Hey there, folks. Hope you're having a fantastic weekend. Coming at you with this week's market wrap. A lot to go over here. Pretty accurate calls last week. At the end of the previous week, coming into the holiday, I was actually pretty darn bullish that we were set up for a nice snapback within the markets, and we did get that snapback. We got some follow through up until Wednesday, and then Wednesday I sent out kind of an emergency alert warning that we were potentially coming up into an area of resistance and that we could see a bit of a pullback, if not just a pause and some consolidation in the market. And that's what we really saw on Thursday and Friday. And now heading into next week, there really isn't a lot out there next week unless something significant happens over the weekend in some of the overseas markets. I don't see anything that really is going to potentially give us a dramatic move in the markets. I think actually what we're going to kind of see is more choppy action with a bias towards the bearish side. So in other words, maybe we grind down a bit, but I don't see a big dramatic sell-off unless we were to take out some key levels on, like for example, on the S&P 500 or in the IBB. I think we could see some really choppy action with a bearish tone. So let's go through exactly what it is I'm looking at. And we're on a weekly time frame, and the reason why I'm using a weekly to show this is because we get some clearly defined areas of resistance and support on the weekly. And remember, the longer the time frame, the more significant those areas of price resistance and support become. So XTN Transportations, which actually had a fairly decent week last week, are coming up into an area of clear resistance and support. Okay, and it shouldn't be a big surprise if we were to stall out in this area. Now, we don't have to pinpoint the price. There can be a band of area of resistance and support. Doesn't necessarily have to be one specific price. So let's look at the XRT, the retail. We talked about XRT last week in the short video, and we're coming up into an area that's fairly significant, right? 42, between 41.88 and 42, we're going to see some resistance, and we're stalling out right there. Let's take a look at the daily and see how we came up into it on Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday we started to pull back. Let's take a look at the consumer discretionary coming up into a short-term trend line. Look, clearly we are in a downward trend, and we pierced below a long-term trend line. Now, it wouldn't be a big shocker if at this point of resistance we begin to pull back and retest that long-term trend line. Healthcare did break over this shorter term trend line. Now we're coming up into this band of price resistance, right? You can see where this acted as resistance, then acted as support. We could have a little more upside, but see here we've got some support and then we've got some resistance, and that's where we seem to be stalling out a bit. Let's take a look at XLK, which is the technology ETF, again coming up into resistance that acted once as support. Let's take a look at the industrials coming up into this short-term trend line. But you can see that we are still in a downtrend in the industrials. We got some earnings out of Deere on Friday that were not in any way, shape, or form good earnings. The reason why I'm thinking that next week, I mean, we're coming into the end of earnings season. We do have, uh, Home Depot, Fitbit on Monday, could be interesting. But I think there's going to be some stock. It's definitely going to be more of a stock pickers market, I think, next week than an overall market move type week. Okay, I think we're potentially looking at some grinding going on. XLF, we did break over this short-term trend line, had a nice snapback. Let's back out and take a look at the weekly on the XLF. Right, we came down, we tapped on this long-term trend line, had a nice little bounce. Whether that continues, we'll see. I think it'll be very important for the financials to be able to show some strength, and I just don't think we're going to see that. Let's take a look at the XLE, the energy. Again, coming up into resistance, which was support. Significant price here. And as you look at this and see more and more sectors that are coming up into a fairly significant area of price resistance and support, it leads you to think that we're going to struggle a bit. We've got to build up, right? We've got to consolidate and try and build up some energy before we have enough force to take out those price areas. And we've already had a pretty significant run into these areas. So that's why I still remain cautious with the bearish tone. This is the materials sector, which has had a nice bounce, but we could be looking at a bit of a pullback. Let's keep going here. Home builders came down to a very key area of support, have bounced off. And if you watched my my stocks to watch last week, one of the stocks that I was looking at was Beazer Homes, BZH. I did not get my entry on Beazer, but I am thinking I may get my entry on Beazer sometime this week, and that is for a long-term hold. XBI, Biotech, again, coming up into an area of resistance. It did reclaim the 200 simple weekly, but it is also coming back up into this trend line, which happens to coincide with this price resistance and support. Let's take a look at TZA. So this is the small cap bear. As you can see here, we're pulling back into a potential area of support right here around 56.58, which would, if that holds and we get a bounce there, you're looking at the IWM potentially rolling over. So, which makes sense because we'll get to the IWM in a minute here, and we can see that we've got some fairly significant resistance on the IWM. Let's take a look at the TLT, which had a pretty parabolic move. Okay, and let's go to the daily on that. I just want to show you, we got out of the upper Bollinger Band, and we have pulled back to an area of potential price support and had a nice little bounce. We've got stochastics which are starting to curl to the upside, so we could see TLT potentially bounce and continue to rise, which likely would not be good for the overall markets. Let's take a look real quick at the T2108 and T2107, which, if you follow me, are important indicators. And you know, they came up into an area of resistance. Okay, so for us to see a pullback would not be a big shocker. T2108 stocks above their 40-day moving average. T2107 again up into an area of resistance and potential support. So we're seeing this across the board. Let's take a look at the SPY real quick. Coming up into this area, 195, we struggled there. Okay, it is a fairly significant area of price resistance and support. I think a really interesting area that we want to pay attention to. You know, real quickly, we'll just take a look at the SMH. It is coming up into a trend line, some trend line resistance, potential resistance at the $50 mark, round number. Let's take a look at Nugget. So gold and the gold miners have had a really nice move, which makes sense because it's the perceived safety trade. We are coming up into some resistance. Let's take a look at this more on the weekly. I think we can get a little bit clearer of a picture here. But we're coming up into some resistance. We're coming up into the 50-week moving average. And I think it's, like I said, we're going to consolidate. We're not in a place where I think we're going to see any dramatic moves. What that will do is that will work off some of the volatility. We won't see quite as much volatility, and we're not going to see quite as much price action. Now, like I said, something could happen over the weekend. Mario Draghi could pull out the bazooka, you know, who knows? And then maybe we do get some kind of a dramatic move in the markets. But for right now, I wouldn't be surprised if we just continued to see more choppy action until we determine which direction we're heading in. JNUG has had a really nice move on the weekly, coming up into an area of resistance, right? So could we flag out here? Could we consolidate before we take out that significant price? It is certainly possible. JDust has had a swift move to the downside, which makes sense since we've had a fairly big move in gold and the gold miners. Let's see here. IYT, transportation sector, again, coming up into a very significant area of price support and resistance. Let's take a look at IWM. So here we are on the weekly time frame. We broke below this long-term downtrend, and we basically have a band of price resistance up into this 103.62 area, and we're seeing a little bit here at the 100 mark, right, which is a big round number. So between 100 and 103, we've got a band of resistance, and we also have this long-term trend line that we're going to have to contend with that could potentially act as some significant resistance. Let's take a look at the IBB. Biotechs, we came down, we tested this trend line right here, bounced right off of it. Now, I will say, stochastics look like they're getting ready to curl to the upside. So maybe we do get some kind of nice action in the biotechs. I think that would be really good for the overall markets. But here we have a band of resistance, basically between 266 and up to 273, right? I mean, we've got some pretty clear support and resistance there in price. Let's take a look at GLD. area of resistance. Let's take a look more on the daily, see what we got going on there. Well within the Bollinger Band, but this is a big area right here, this 117. See if this acts as support for gold. It looks like we're kind of flagging out here after piercing the upper Bollinger Band. And I'm just going to cap this off with the NASDAQ. Again, coming up into a fairly significant area of support and resistance in price, right? Every time we've tapped, support, resistance. So we've had a pretty nice little bounce back. It's fairly dramatic. We're coming up into areas of resistance and support in several, almost all of the sectors really, which indicates to me that maybe we get some consolidation action with a bearish drift lower and allow some of this volatility to be sucked out of the market before we get our next big move. So that's it. I think it's going to be a choppy week. It could be a fairly challenging week. And I will be back tomorrow morning with stocks to watch for next week. If you have any stocks or an index that you'd like to ask about, send me an email, send me a tweet. I'll be more than happy to take a look at them if you can't make it to the live session. And it'll be at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Vegas time. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Vegas time, live session of stocks to watch. Put a list together, send it to me, and I'll do my best to get it on the video. Okay? That's it, folks. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and I'll see you early tomorrow morning.